we have a very difficult and potentially unstable world that the new year has kicked off. And at the same time, Trump is not applying the same kind of punitive measures to Putin, who is arguably doing a lot worse than Maduro, and in Europe's backyard, and will affect much more of the world than Venezuela did.
President Maduro is, well, now perhaps former President Maduro is due to appear before a US federal judge today, where he'll be formally notified about the charges against him. Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, are accused of narco-terrorism linked to the alleged trafficking of cocaine into the US. We can speak to Christiane Amanpour, CNN's chief international anchor. She interviewed Maduro in 2014, so she knows what he was like as president. Here's a moment from the interview where she asks Maduro about the relationship between Venezuela and the US.
Let me ask you about Venezuela's relations with the United States of America. They are very bad. We've heard many attacks by President Hugo Chavez on the American presidents, and lots of attacks verbally back and forth. But you have now nominated one of your most able and trusted diplomats to be your next ambassador to the United States. Are you looking to move forward in this relationship, to change this relationship?
I do not agree with the first part of your question. Our relations with the US are very good. Very good. Our relations with the workers, with the trade unions, with the artists, with intellectuals, with the social movements.
All right, with the government of the United States.
With the government, of the US government, it is well known. In declassified Pentagon papers of the CIA, the State Department, WikiLeaks, there's sufficient evidence of US agencies of how you have constantly conspired to put an end to this revolution, to destroy President Chavez.
Let's talk to Christiane now. Christiane, morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
Do you think he ever, because there's lots of footage of him even in recent days saying, come and get me, come and get me. Even from that interview there, he's saying they're out to get me. Do you think he quite believed Trump would go this quickly, this hard, the way he has done?
You know, it's hard to get into his head, but clearly he didn't act as though, because I agree with you, one of his last public appearances, he was sort of dancing, and I think his demeanor was given and sort of taken by the US as slightly mocking the US. But I think that he's always been incredibly defiant. He was very defiant when I interviewed him, when others have. He's right, though. The United States has been essentially after certainly Chavez and Maduro, and certainly that system ever since Chavez took over. It's a very left-wing socialist system. It's against ideologically what the United States stands for. And it has been an incredibly bad relationship for many years. But I think what the problem here is, we don't know exactly why this event happened. It's coming clearer now because since taking Maduro, Trump has spoken multiple times about oil being the main imperative. If you remember at the beginning, it was about drugs, and then it was about democracy. But the drugs thing is, according to experts, belied by the fact that virtually like just a small handful of drugs comes from Venezuela into the United States. So much more comes from Colombia and other countries. On democracy, you've seen what Trump has done. The Democratic leader who actually is considered to have won the election, or at least her party, and won the Nobel Prize, has been totally dissed. And Trump is now working apparently with the interim president, who was Maduro's vice president. So it does appear that it is not regime change at the moment, and that it is all about enriching the United States and regaining what Trump says, the oil rights that he says were stolen when Venezuela nationalized them. So that plus, what does he mean by the United States is going to run the country? Leave a huge number of questions out there.
It's also, this is a big problem for the UK government. Just hearing you go through that then, Trump's position as he's going to end up in is this is a bit to do with oil, a bit to do with having a new relationship with the regime that enriches America, a bit to do with the sort of the Don Roe doctrine that he talks about, America's sphere of influences. It's going to be very difficult for the UK government to say, well, we respect international law on one hand, and we also think Donald Trump has done a great thing by getting rid of a terrible president. They're going to be pushed into having to have an opinion, aren't they, at some point about what Trump has actually done with what purpose?
Probably, yes. I mean, you can already see you asking questions. The papers are full of it. All the news bulletins are full of it. Why doesn't the prime minister make a stronger stance against this? Because in general, it is considered a violation of international law. And a violation of American law. There was no congressional approval. There was no UN approval, quite the opposite. And, it harkens back to Iraq, where certainly Britons and many Americans and many people around the world have a very deep hangover of the intervention into Iraq, which similarly removed a terrible decades-long dictator who had assaulted his people, who had, was really practically on the totalitarian spectrum, a monstrous dictator. But that was incredibly badly managed, as you know, after the removal of Saddam Hussein. And that led to decades of backlash, of ISIS developing in Iraq, of refugees. Just the whole thing was a complete mess. And now people are being asked to believe that the United States, which has not had a very good record of intervention and nation building, to believe that the United States is going to be able to manage a massive country like Venezuela without any personnel on the ground, because at the moment there are no boots on the ground of that kind of significance. And we don't know where Trump is going to go. But when you talk about the Don Roe doctrine, he himself has even mentioned that. Basically, that harkens back to the 1900s of the Monroe Doctrine, which labeled America's right to control its own hemisphere. Well, just this weekend, Katie Miller, you probably know her name. She's the wife of Stephen Miller, who's a very close advisor to President Trump on just about everything, not just immigration, has posted a map of Greenland overlaid with the stars and stripes and written soon. So that has created a huge kerfuffle, as you can imagine, again, with the Danish prime minister strongly rejecting that. All this to say that we don't know where this is going to lead next. Right. And certainly nations are going to have to stand up and say what their red lines are. Democratic nations, Britain, Denmark, etc.
And what's fascinating is Kate invited the government this morning to do that with Greenland, and it was unable to do it even with Greenland, let alone Venezuela or Colombia or Cuba or Mexico, which is further outside our sphere of influence. Christiane, you're a very wise woman. You've seen an awful lot over the years. Is it fair to say that international law, which we'll hear a lot of over the next couple of weeks, the UN is going to have a meeting today, the Security Council may or may not do something, although it'll be vetoed if it does anything of any significance. Is international law a chimera? Does it actually exist in the real world? Or is actually the law of the jungle, the law of who is the strongest, the real thing that dictates foreign policy in the world?
Well, I think both. Certainly for many decades, international law did prevail. The UN was much stronger several decades ago. It had a much bigger respect. But gradually, and I would potentially even sort of label it around 9/11, when essentially international law and the way Britain, the United States, other countries reacted to terrorist attacks from the Middle East has really compromised the notion of international law. Then you have people like Putin, who has seriously violated international law with his, invasions of Ukraine and other former Soviet republics, and threatening all the time. So in general, I think international law is on a very weak standing and a very weak footing. And that's what's quite worrying, because as you say, even before Trump actually took office and in the early days, you had European leaders, I think maybe even French leaders, saying that, the law of the jungle, the law of the strongest, the survival of the fittest is what's potentially coming back under Trump. Because even before this Venezuela action, he was talking, as you remember, about all those others. There was Colombia, there was Panama, there was Canada, as we mentioned, there was Greenland, and on and on. And it was something that Trump has been telegraphing since the day he stepped into office, if not before. So I think this is now a very clarifying moment, and international community has to decide how to react to it. Having said that, I think what you're hearing now is that European leaders are saying, Nicolás Maduro was a murderous dictator, whether he was a narco trafficker, whether he was all the other things, but he was certainly anti-democratic. That came through very, very clearly in my interview with him. And that was years ago. As you know, he's considered to have stolen the latest election. But then you don't have leaders standing up for the actual opposition, the democratic opposition, who they were busy talking up and indeed bestowing a Nobel Peace Prize on, Corina Maria Machado. Now she's being thrown to the wolves. Trump says she has no respect. She doesn't have the strength to run Venezuela. So all of that is very confusing. And at the same time, you've got Trump signaling outside his hemisphere that he will intervene in some way in Iran under the current, if the current anti-government protests there become, any more deadly. So we have a very difficult and potentially unstable world that the new year has kicked off. And at the same time, Trump is not applying the same kind of punitive measures to Putin, who is arguably doing a lot worse than Maduro, and in Europe's backyard, and will affect much more of the world than Venezuela did.
It's so interesting, Chris. It's great to speak to you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Christiane Amanpour, that's CNN's chief international anchor. A volatile 2026 is the brief summary of that, I think.